Welcome guys, in this video we are going to talk about the most widely used built-in directive of Angular, which is ngIf, which lets you conditionally show certain part of your UI. We'll see the syntax of ngIf, how to write an associated else block with ngIf. We'll also see the broken down version of this structural directive as an attribute directive and lots of other stuff. So let's get started. This is part of the video series Angular course. If you have not watched the earlier videos, you can go through them for a better understanding. So ngIf is a built-in directive provided by Angular which lets you conditionally show or hide certain part of your UI. The syntax for using ngIf looks like this. So it uses the keyword ngIf followed by a condition. Now if this condition, which is enclosed within the quotation mark, is evaluated to be true or true in nature, then the entire element over which ngIf is applied will be rendered into your DOM. If this condition is false, this element will not render. As it changes the structure of the DOM, ngIf is known as a structural directive. Unlike the other built-in directive that we have seen so far, ngIf actually changes your DOM layout or DOM structure. To denote that, Angular uses this special syntax, which is to put a star mark before the directive name. This is the same case for all the structural directive that we have in Angular, like ngFor, ngSwitch, etc. We have an alternative syntax to use the ngIf where we don't need to put this star mark before our ngIf, but that is some advanced use case and we will cover that in the later part of this video. As of now, let's quickly look into some examples by which we can understand how ngIf can be useful in our day-to-day task. Let's say we have a div element which shows the greeting message to the user. But this information might not be available to our application all the time. So let us assume we have a variable in our TypeScript file which holds this information, that whether the user information is available or it is not available. We want this div element to be rendered if only the user information is available. We can do that using ngIf. This way, this div element will only be rendered if the value of isUserAvailable variable is true or true in nature. So right now the value of the isUser variable is true, hence we can see this div element rendered into our page. If we inspect this element, then you can see that we have a div element under our app root. But if I now change it to false, then we are served with a blank page, and also the element that we had under the app root is now gone. This is how ngIf actually changes the structure of the DOM, and hence it is a structural directive. But having a blank page is not so useful. We probably want to display a default message to the user. So if the user information is available, then display welcome DOM. If it's not available, just display the default message. Very easy to do. We can use one more ngIf and put a negation here. In that case, the message would be welcome user. So if this variable is true, then this part will be false, and if it is false, this thing will be true. So right now user is seeing the default message. Well, that is one way of doing it, but what if we actually want to have an else block instead of putting a workaround here? Using an else block associated with an ngIf is little bit tricky in Angular. You have to use a new element here, which is ngTemplate. Let me create one more element, which is ngTemplate. Instead of having the default message here, I will instead put it inside our ngTemplate. And in that case, we don't need this condition anymore. Instead, what will we do? We will put a template reference variable here. In Angular, it is known as template reference variable, by which we uniquely identify an HTML element in our template. So if anywhere within the template I refer to else block, that will mean this entire element. This is what we are going to use with our ngIf block. Let me remove this div element from here. Then we have to put a semicolon, then else. Then we have to put the template reference that we want to display if this condition is false. So in this case, our template reference variable is else block. This also displays the default message to the user, but here we are using the else block to achieve this. There is also a shorthand for using the else block. You can get rid of this semicolon and just use a space. That still works. Let's say you are holding your information within a variable which is user. Instead of using an additional boolean variable, you can use this user variable itself to conditionally display the welcome message to the user. Instead of a boolean value, our ngIf now holds an object. Though it is not boolean, but as our object is filled up with some value and it is not null, it is truly in nature. Hence, this block will be rendered. So we are getting a welcome Tom message in our page. But let's say you have not received the user information from your backend and hence the variable user is not set. Then if you look back, the welcome message is not printed now because our user is now null, or rather I would say it is undefined. Hence it is falsy in nature. So this block here did not render. Now that we have a little bit understanding of ng template and also the reference variable, I would like to show you one more alternative syntax for ngIf. This is known as the if then else syntax for ngIf. In this example, we are going to show how to render two different blocks, one for the true condition and the other for the false condition. So in this case, this div here only holds the condition but does not hold any UI to display. So this ng template will hold the UI for true condition and this will hold for the false condition. How can we link this two part of ng template with our ngIf here? It follows a syntax which looks like this. You can read this statement this way: if this condition is true, then render the then block, and if it's false, then render the else block. The current value of isUser variable is false, so else block will be rendered, which holds the default welcome message. If you change the template reference name, for example, instead of else block, you want to name it as default block maybe, or default message. But if you now try to save this, it will give you an error saying that else block does not exist on your app component because it is trying to find else block template reference in your app component. But now it has changed to default message. Then again, it works. I promised you that our structural directives precede with this star mark to denote that this directive can change the structure of your DOM. But surprise, you can also use your property binding syntax with ngIf. Let me show you how. Let me change the value of isUser available to true. Then this can also be a way to use ngIf. As you have rightly observed that we are not preceding our ngIf with star mark now, we have just used the property binding syntax with our ngIf, where we are enclosing our ngIf with bracket, and then in the right hand side we are giving the condition. But that would only work if you are using it with ng template. Our second block also renders welcome Tom. So basically, this section here is just a broken down version of this div element here. So any structural directive comes with its own ng template. You can explicitly mention that by using a ng template tag. Otherwise, you can just go by this simply a syntax. That's it about ngIf. I would like to repeat that this is most widely used structural directive, or any directive for that matter. So get familiar with it by trying different options with ngIf. I have put the link to the snippet of the code under the description. That's a live code example, so you can directly jump in and make changes on the code. That's it for now. If you like my content, please subscribe the channel to get the update of the latest content. I will see you in the next one.